Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everybody. Just going to find some notes. When I wrote this slide presentation, it's really all about insight and some of the stuff we do at work. But I reflected afterwards, it's really all about collaboration, and that's really why we're here today. And why I'm here today is because Ruth and colleagues at the Penn team allowed us to join in with the awards and join our FFT awards. So thank you very much for allowing us to do that. Okay, So in the spirit of experiences of care, this is all about understanding experiences of care, which is what we do in the Insight team. And our view really is that any team really needs to understand the service, the people that it serves. It's really easy to forget what it's like to be on the receiving end, to be Yvonne, for example, and Yvonne's family members. It's really easy to forget what it's like to be a person becoming a patient through the NHS. And that's why we think we ought to be taking a moment to find out what it feels to be like those people. But inside is a bit of a difficult word. It's a bit complicated. So what does it actually mean? Well, it's about getting an accurate and deep understanding of a subject. And to do this, we advocate a number of things using qualitative and quantitative data, so numbers as well as what people say. A range of means of getting the data, so not just surveys, which is what we spend a lot of our time doing, but also focus groups, maybe interviews, maybe just sitting and watching what happens when patients come and sit in an outpatient department and wait for their appointments. Well, how do people really behave? What's their experience really like? And really, it's everyone's business. So I know you're all advocates of understanding how patients interact with the NHS and how the NHS interacts with them. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond everybody in this room and to the people back in your organisations. So what can we learn? Oh, I skipped a slide. So this is a definition about why it's important to look at this. And really it's about how we think and some of the default failings of our brain sometimes, in terms of we sometimes think that all we can see is all there is to know about something. That's how everybody works. Our perception is everything. So sometimes we forget to find out what other people are experiencing and what other people's views are. So if we can supplement what we see and accept the fact that somebody else might see things differently, that might inspire us to change. It might inspire us to think, well, something needs to happen here and things could be improved. And that's why we're all here today, because you've all thought that. So what do we do in our merry band? Well, we run a lot of surveys, so there's a list of them up there, but they cover primary care as well as hospital care. Also, we look at the cancer pathway. We also look at bereavement and the end-of-life care. We have patient-reported outcome measures, which are lesser known. I don't know if other people have heard of PROMs. And also the friends and family test, as that's been mentioned. And we work with other people around the system to try and do the best job we can, really. So we have several established national mechanisms of hearing from people, and I'm sure you locally have lots more locally established ways of hearing from people. So the question is, do patients think it's easy to give feedback? Well, when we look at this was data collected in winter last year. So we can see about 51% of people say it is easy to give feedback, and about a third disagree with that. So it's interesting to think about why that is the case when we look at something like this, which demonstrates the plethora of ways in which people can give feedback, from something structured like surveys that you can use to generalise and understand what representative experiences are for many people, to more individual means of giving feedback like writing on NHS Choices, means of maybe a complaint, which can be a terribly rich source of information about what happened to somebody, as well as working with patients collaboratively in focus groups and design groups. So lots of ways in which patients can feed back. It might present it that it's easy for people to feed back, but actually it's a complicated business. We did some work with a team called Solutions, and they did some research to find out what it's like to be a patient and to give feedback about the NHS. And it is a complicated matter. So it might be about the type of feedback. Is it positive or negative? What do you actually want to say? It might depend on the topic. So is it about cleanliness? Is it about the communications between you and your doctors? Was it about the treatment? Was it about the process of just getting into the building? There might be something interesting about when is the feedback asked for? So are you still in the process of having treatment? Is it just after, or is it quite a while after, while you've had time to reflect and you've had some distance between yourself and your healthcare? It might depend on the care setting. So are you still an inpatient in the ward, or have you left and you're back at home? Or are you able to have some kind of more distant relationship where maybe a district nurse is coming to you or you're going to an outpatient clinic? And also a big factor is, will someone know what I said about them? Massive concern about people, particularly if they're still having treatment, about if I've got something bad to say because actually I had a poor experience this time, will it come back to me and will I get worse treatment as a result? And on top of that, not just those things, but my state of health. So am I recovered? Am I living with illness? Or am I about to embark on a journey? And NHS Empathy, which is really about how people feel about the NHS. So as part of the research, we learned that people feel terribly proud of the NHS and they feel terribly a sense of ownership about it, but not necessarily a sense of responsibility to feed back to patients and to tell us how we could improve, because it's slightly subtly different from maybe a consumer relationship. And also there's a perception that if patients feed back to us and give us feedback, that's going to create more work. And patients know we're already terribly busy, so they don't want to add to that burden. So there's a whole heap of stuff going on when patients are giving us feedback. So that's why it's doubly important to make sure that we learn about it and listen to it when they do give it to us. So one of our missions in the Insight team is to help everybody make more of what people tell us. And one area we've done this with is Lancaster University, and they've been looking at the comments on NHS Choices. I don't know if people are familiar with that website where you can leave reviews and give some kind of feedback on your experience. And they looked at over 200,000, that's quite a lot, 200,000 comments and 29 million words across all settings. And they did some evaluation. So just to give a quick kind of highlight of what they found. So when you look at this, there's the proportion of positive to negative comments overwhelmingly are on the treatment. So really good comments about the treatment, coming down to about half and half about the system and the organisation, but then dropping off after that and starting to see more negative comments about communication and interpersonal skills. And what they did further was on NHS Choices, I don't know if you know, you can recommend, there's their own version of, would you recommend this place for care and treatment? And they linked the comments, so all the stuff here, with the score they had given on the are you likely to recommend? And what they found is overwhelmingly when people were likely to recommend, it was because of good interpersonal skills. So just as we've heard from Yvonne, so the Giles, the Lauras, the Ashleys, was it? So those people who make a real difference to someone's interaction with the NHS are when people will speak up about it. So part of our role in the team is to share stuff like this, is to try and share what we know so that you can then do things with it. So we have been developing an Insight network. There is a stand here today which is being expertly manned by my colleagues Gillian and Sharon. So they've got information on how to join the network, or you can email that email address and we'll get you linked up. So please do that. And also we've been developing a set of bite-sized guides, which are also on the table outside. I think there are 5 there. So one is about patient-reported outcome measures, which we thought people knew less about. So understanding PROMs and how to work with PROMs. There's one about what is already available. So there's different data sources in the surveys that I mentioned at the start, information on how to work with those where they're available. There's one about how to commission new research. We're very aware at the moment that people are establishing STPs, new ways of working, vanguards. So how are you understanding how your patients operate in these new geographical kind of ways? So it might be of interest to learn how can we find out what patients think. And we're very mindful that many people might be doing the same thing here. So if you do research and you would like to share it with other people that might have similar populations, we can do that for you via the network. But the bite-sized guide might give you some hints about how to interact with suppliers, for example, the people that are outside today, what kind of questions to ask them, what kind of things to expect, how you might get the most out of the supplier that you choose. And I think there's another couple. One's about qualitative data, so how to work with what people are telling you in their own words. And I've forgotten the 5th one. What's the 5th one? how to hear from people with a learning disability, so how to make the most of opportunities to interact with them and not ignore them just because it might be harder to communicate with that group. Okay, so alongside this, we really want to make the most of the data, and there's different types of data. We learned a lot about FFT as we've been rolling it out, as have, I'm sure, many of you. And at the start, it got a lot of criticism for not being a robust metric, for not really being managed in the same way that survey data is. So you could point a stick at it in terms of how does this trust compare to this trust, and it probably wouldn't hold up to that. But that's okay. And part of the trick is to know when to use which data for which opportunity and which activity. So things on the left-hand side, if you want to understand what is a true picture for most people, then you would want to use robust data. So perhaps the survey data, which is managed in such a way that we can account for bias, we can understand who's not responding, who's not feeding into these set of results, and how the population is feeling about something. And sometimes that's what you need, particularly if you want to compare organisations or we're attaching money to something. It's really important that we have confidence in that data. But it might be just good enough to know what's happening for this one person. That might be enough to inspire you to take action to improve things. So whilst it's true that there is no one perfect data collection mechanism, it's also true that one might be perfectly good enough for the purposes that you want it to achieve. So it's not just patients, it's all about you guys as well. So staff are massively important for this agenda. And for the last 3 years, we've been asking staff in the NHS staff survey what they feel about patient feedback. So if you look at the graph there, we've got 3 years worth of data. And you can see the results from last year's survey were published just 2 weeks ago. So this is kind of hot analysis. But you can see there's a slight dip in what's being collected, but a slight rise, compared to last year anyway, in terms of people using those feedback to make decisions, which is exactly where we want to go, making more of what people say in order to make decisions. And that staff have risen year on year in terms of staff saying that they get updates on patient feedback. And why is this important? And this is where I've stolen with pride, if that's okay. It's from Karen Deeney, who's in the wonderful patient experience team, and she'll be here later. So please do talk to her about all things staff related. But employee engagement and experience is the single best predictor of NHS trust outcomes. So if we're in this room and we're all interested in patient experience, we ought to really be interested in staff experience as well. And that's Michael West. I don't know if people have heard of Michael West. He's quite an eminent professor who's spent a lot of time looking at the staff survey data and how it relates to other trust indicators like mortality or absence or retention. So it's really vital that we start to look at experience of staff. And this could be the most vital relationship that we look at when it comes to improving experiences of care and productivity. And as Karen says, it's really about, it's her graphic, it's wonderful, it's not mine, two sides of one coin. So what staff actually say about engagement, what's happening in that? So as you can see, over the past 5 years, in terms of staff engagement, we've seen a steady rise. There was a bit of a dip in 2014, but since then it's come back quite strongly, and this is out of 5, if that helps. I know it's a bit of a confusing scale. But really what that shows is that the huge leap we made in 2015 has been sustained this year. And when you think about the variation across trusts in these results, that's quite something. And this is the data for all trusts in the NHS. And the data we had this year from the staff survey was the largest ever response we've ever had. I think it was 423,000 members of staff, which is kind of like a third of the workforce. So it's incredible volumes of staff feeding back to us. But that by itself can be a bit hard to understand. So it'd be useful to look at what's beneath that engagement score. So the engagement score itself comprises of 9 specific questions in the staff survey, and those are listed, and hopefully you can see them clearly enough, but I'm sure the slides can be sent around afterwards. But so here what we can see is the range of scores. So what was the worst score and what's the highest score, and a trust level for each of those questions, and those questions making up the engagement score. So you can see on the far left, That's where we see the most variation. So almost more than 50% variation in the questions around staff saying that care of patients or service users is the organisation's top priority. And the question about advocacy, I'd recommend my organisation as a place to work, and about care. If a friend or relative needed care, I'd be happy with the care provided here. So that's where we see the most variation. And the least variation about being enthusiastic about my job, so I think it's just less than about 20% difference there. So in terms of practically taking something back to your own trust, understanding what's our engagement score, making what's happening with our engagement score, it might be interesting to think, where do you fit in terms of that variation? What's happening in your results? Okay. So a final question, this is Karen's question, which again I've pinched, but just something to ponder, I guess, through the course of the day when you hear about the winners and the excellent work that people have been doing, and understand how are we encouraged as patient experience advocates to link in with staff experience or HR colleagues in terms of improving our staff experience back at base. And finally, just to sum up our message in the Insight team, is that we really want to make more of the data that we're hearing. And we recognise we have a job to help you do that. So that's why we're doing our bite-sized guides and our network. And if you have ideas on how we can help you further, then please do let us know. We'll be very happy to help. And I think that was it. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.